And we are delighted today to be kicking off the season, the Economic Club season, with Dan Coates today, former U.S. Director of National Intelligence. With today's global economy more connected than ever, the state of security is a top priority for government, business, and consumers alike. Coates highlighted this importance in the worldwide threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community, which was released earlier this year. And this report will guide the efforts of 17 different organizations in the U.S. intelligence community, including the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the National Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and others for the next 4 years. Lots of groups. Dan Coates has a long history of government service going back nearly 40 years. For most of the 1980s, he served as Indiana's 4th congressional district in the House of Representatives and served as Indiana's U.S. Senator for the following decade. He was the ambassador to Germany from 2001 to 2005, which proved to be a critical time for international relations in our nation's history, as he landed in Germany 3 days before the tragic events of 9/11. And during that time, he played a vital part in establishing strong, crucial international relations. In January 2011, he returned to the U.S. Senate, where he served on the Senate Elect Committee on Intelligence, as well as the Finance, Appropriations, and Joint Economic Committees. And then on March 16, 2017, he was sworn in as the 5th Director of National Intelligence. In that position, he led the United States intelligence community from March until August of 2019, and served as intelligence advisor to the president. I'd like to welcome Dan. Let's give him a warm Hoosier welcome to come up and join us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Allison. Allison, thank you for all you've done to pull this together, and I want to thank Deborah Daniels, who called me almost a year ago and said, I'm in charge of working to tee up the speakers for next year, and could we lock something in? I said, well, I don't know if I'll still be D&I or not D&I. More likely not than still. She said, well, that's all right. Whether you are or you aren't, you can have something to say if you are or you're not. And so we locked it in. And Deborah, thank you for working to, and Allison also, and a number of people, Michelle, and getting the logistics together and so forth. People ask what's the difference between being the D&I and not being the D&I. Being the D&I, I'm surrounded by people who can do a whole bunch of things for me, personally and professionally. Not being D&I, I'm on my own. And after 6 years in the Senate and 3 years as D&I, surrounded by a very bright and capable staff, I've had to return to my own talents, or lack of talents, during a technological revolution, which I had nothing to participate or do with on my own. And now I'm trying to do it on my own. And back to normal has been really tough. So much electronic. Leading the D&I, it's a STEM group. I'm a liberal arts major. Have a law degree, but it had nothing to, well, thank you. And when a liberal arts major walks into a STEM group of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, engineers and scientists and analysts and technology experts, which is the intelligence community, there's a big learning curve, trust me. But nevertheless, it has been quite an adventure, and I'm happy to be able to be here with you to talk a little bit about what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. The Office of Director of National Intelligence was teed up legislatively after the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, which Lee Hamilton co-chaired. And that recommendation was based on the fact that there was evidence, had it been coordinated, would have alerted us to the coming 9/11 attack. The information was there, the threat was there, but it was in pieces in different siloed agencies of the intelligence community. And so the whole bottom line out of the recommendations that came from the committee was we have to integrate. We have to bring all this together. I looked at it like we're trying to put a puzzle together, that we have 16 agencies plus the leadership agency, the ODNI, and each of those agencies have pieces of that puzzle. Now, some agencies, like the CIA, have big pieces. NGA or NSA, which takes down signals information and coordinates that, and they have major roles. But each agency, even the smallest agency, and there are 16 of them, have pieces. And you can't get the full picture unless you complete the puzzle. And so what the intelligence community does on a 365 days, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, what we do is we, from a foreign basis, look at the world, look at what collect information that we can then process, analyze, put it together to paint a picture or complete a puzzle, and provide it to the President of the United States, to the Vice President, to the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, to all of our policymakers, National Security Advisor, and others, providing that information to them on a daily basis, year-round. It is the significant process that takes place with hundreds of people working in shifts, many starting at midnight, getting that information together for early in the morning and disseminating that about to a significant number of policymakers throughout government so that everybody is on the same page. The legislation also said that the director of the Defense Intelligence Agencies would be the principal advisor to the President of the United States. So out of that process, there is a special process that is designed specifically to be given to the top leadership in the White House, starting with the President. And that is then presented to him by a briefing several times a week, but if he's traveling differently, but then he gets a briefing from a briefer that goes with him. That is presented to him in the Oval Office. And on that basis, we are obligated to provide facts, not just the facts. Some of you that are in my generation remember Jack Webb. Just the facts, ma'am. That is our role. And we work very, very hard to maintain that role and provide that type of information. There's also a lot of administrative duties. We oversee all the other 16 agencies. We write their budgets. The legislative committee, the Congress, said we don't want to devolve all the interest here in one segment. The directors of each of the agencies have to be operationally directive, or this isn't going to work. So they divided it up. They gave us the budget responsibilities, the administration responsibilities throughout the community, but operationally fell to the directors of the various 16 agencies. I early on realized that, as did not happen in the past, many agencies jealous of each other, first to get their information in, holding other information, we don't want that spread around and so forth. That had to be integrated. And the only way to integrate that was to build trust relationships with the directors and those who work for those other agencies. So early on in my job, I said, I'm not calling you to come to me, even though technically I'm your boss. I'm coming to you. I want to sit down with you. I want to establish a working relationship with you, professional and maybe even friendship relationship. I want to know what your agency does. I want you to walk me through everything that you're doing. I want to meet your people. I want to talk to your people. And so early on in the job, among many other things that we're doing, we took the responsibility to go out, and they're spread across the country, obviously many of them in Washington, D.C., but with components around the country. So that involved a lot of domestic travel, but learning, and more importantly, establishing the relationships. And I wanted that to be a trust relationship where we could trust each other, where our mission had to be to prevent another attack, not by, from 9/11, but also giving our policymakers the information they needed to make decisions. Half of those agencies are connected to the Department of Defense. So we have special relationships with those in the military. And with that, along with the directors of the various agencies, I found myself in an environment with extraordinary people, with extraordinary lifetime experiences, extraordinary processes in which we could use technology to gain what we needed to know. And working as part of the national security team, and also as a cabinet member, first time that any president has named a director of national intelligence and the director of the CIA as members of the cabinet. But we were there with the top leadership on national security questions, providing the intelligence that was necessary to formulate. And we were a part of that formulating of that process, which was somewhat unique, but extraordinarily important. And the friendships made there and the people that I worked with were just exceptional, exceptional people. So transformation was a word that we needed to use because we had learned that the technological changes in the private sector and around the world and the technological capabilities were evolving so quickly, they were total game changers. So early on, I had to say to our people, my predecessors have done a terrific job in bringing us where we are today. But we cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot accept the status quo. The world is changing almost faster than we can keep up with. And the ability of technological abilities to use technology in ways that could be threats to the United States was racing forward. And we had to position ourselves to totally reconstruct, particularly the OD&I, because we wanted to take the lead, excuse me, but also the entire intelligence community. So we put in place a program to develop the IC, Intelligence Community 2025. What do we need to look like? What components do we need to have? What kind of people do we need to have? What kind of processes do we need to have to stay on top of this, to stay ahead of what is changing in the world? And so that was an enormous task, and we were in the process all through the time I was there, and that'll continue going on. As we looked around the world, as I looked around the world, and then talked to my counterparts, to the person, everyone said, I've been in this for a lifetime. I have never seen such diversity of threats spread around the world, the number of threats that have put us in a potentially vulnerable position. We've never seen anything like it. That demanded the need to do extraordinary things. Fortunately, we are funded through the Defense Department, and the Defense Department was given additional funds because things had, from budget purposes during previous years, had put some lid on what the Defense Department was doing, particularly along the lines of technological advance. And we were mixed in with that. So we did have the resources necessary to begin to reach out. One thing I realized early on was the change in technology is so fast. A government process cannot keep up with it. Decisions have to be made. How do they go forward? They have to be sent to the Congress for legislation. It has to go through an authorization process. It has to go through an appropriations process. It then has to be disseminated out among the agencies. And people were, from dictatorships or monarchies, simply were like CEOs. We don't have that system. A CEO or a dictator of a country can say, I want this done. I want it done in 6 months. Here's your money. Go and do it. Report back to me and get it done. Ours has to go through this major process. So we came to the realization we had to reach out to the private sector. And so much of my time was spent with the private sector, tech companies, others across the country that were engaged in this technological revolution. And we are still in the process of doing that, realizing that we need to, and so we had to build those partnerships, and that required quite a bit of travel. Speaking globally, my job is to have that kind of relationship, was that kind of relationship with our foreign partners, and those that we wanted to be our foreign partners. That required a lot of world travel to sit down with heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, but in particular their directors of their intelligence services, so that we could incorporate what was happening in their realm, and we could share that information that we are gathering and they become part of the whole process. So the first 3 months I was there, I literally was overwhelmed. I said, I cannot get my mind and my arms around all of this. I finally came to the conclusion that it was impossible. As soon as I believed that it was impossible, things seemed to settle in. Let's do what we can do. Let's do it the best way we can, and let's move forward. Now, it's no secret that not only were we living in a diversified, unsettled, threatening world, we had a lot of chaos, a lot of turmoil going on politically in the United States, and particularly inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. And so the challenge there is to try to balance what you're doing with what is needed to be done in an environment where there was a lot of revolving doors and a lot of turnover and a lot of changes. And that also posed a real responsibility and commitment. Allison mentioned the annual threat assessment. So having relationships in the community, having relationships with partners, domestic and foreign, having relationships now with the Congress and its oversight committees, looking at us in the Department of Justice and other, going through all that, relationships had to be built there also. Fortunately, I had those relationships and still had those relationships with members of Congress, both House and Senator, having served in both bodies. And particularly since I went back on a second time in 2010. So I was in a position that others might not have been in. Having all those relationships was greatly helpful in terms of communicating with the Congress, because obviously we had to work with them. Well, part of that is developing the annual threat assessment. That is combined information from literally thousands of people doing work around the world to give us a view of what's happening around the world and putting it into an analysis situation where we try to look forward. What are the threats? what is the current situation, what are the threats coming forward, how are we going to deal with them? And that is presented to the Congress each year. We kind of do a semi-annual upgrade on that, and that involved an enormous amount of time and effort. And it raised questions. It raised questions. Why was this said? What was the basis of this analysis? Is that really what's going on? And so forth. But it was necessary that we provide this both in a public manner, unclassified, but also in a classified manner. And so that, too, it called for a lot of engagement and a lot of work by a lot of people to put us in a position to do that. We were looking at a world which was unraveling from 70 years of what is called liberal world order, liberal definition, not from the political standpoint, but the openness of trade, the openness of working together, the openness of institutions like NATO, alliances that we had in the Pacific and elsewhere, as a way of working together to establish the values of democracy, rules of law, order of how things are done. All of this being challenged now by what is happening in the world with progressives, people. The last thing people want is somebody who has experience and comes from an institution. They want change. They don't like the way things are happening. And so that turmoil is going on around the world, and that makes it a challenge for us. People ask me, what keeps you up at night? Well, as you get older, sometimes you have to get up more to go to the bathroom. I'm not sure that's what they meant when they said, what keeps you up at night? But having said that, there are threats that obviously, when you see the picture of what's happening, you focus in on what those threats are, and you have to do that day after day after day on almost a 24-hour basis. There are some things that are of great concern. Of course, there are conflicts happening across the globe. If I hired a jet and said, I want to take a trip around the world and stop at every place where there is a serious conflict that might ride on the edge of that, or a conflict in place, you would make a lot of takeoffs and a lot of landings. Whether it's the turmoil in the Middle East, whether it's working with what we call the Big Four, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Hey, how about Afghanistan? Okay, we ought to put that in. How about what's happening in North Africa? Yeah, okay. Venezuela. Oh, yeah, that's right. Put in Venezuela. What's happening in the Far East, in the Philippines? What's happening in Indonesia? What about the terrorist groups? What about the ungoverned spaces or the failing states? What about transnational crime, the drugs, the fentanyl, all that stuff, immigration, the impact of immigration on this and on conflict and how it sets displaced persons, millions, never seen since World War II, more displaced persons. That is living in tents, living in the desert, living outside of their home where their towns have been shattered or they had been driven out. What about this toxic cocktail of the Middle East? Oh my gosh, within a small range of, compared to the United States, with a small range of territory, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Iran, Iraq, Egypt, all of these with conflicts against each other. If a spark goes off here, does that light start a wildfire? And so, miscalculation. How do we respond? Mistake, miscalculation. If you read back in history, the kind of things, wars that we never thought we would get into were basically by miscalculation. Somebody got it wrong, or somebody just made a bad decision, and off it went. So you worry about that. You worry about weapons of mass destruction being existential. We all know that a nuclear war has amazing consequences. Jim Mattis, I asked Jim Mattis, I said, Jim, what happens if we get into a worldwide nuclear war? he said, every single species on Earth will be extinguished, and it'll take 10,000 years to recover. Now that keeps you up at night. And that shows the gravity of why we need to take every effort to make sure that doesn't happen. And then I'm at a conference and hearing about bio. WMD is nuclear, chemical, and bio. And someone is talking about the ability now to sequence bio for good and for evil. And putting a pathogen out that we don't have a vaccine for can sweep the world and have enormous consequences. Problem is, bad guys really don't have to have a lot of money, and they have now the technology to put that kind of thing together. And there could be a bio attack released that might not be able to be controlled. Right now in Central Africa, Ebola is spreading, and because there's conflict there, we do have vaccine for that. We can prevent that. Alex Azar is leading that effort. Alex Azar from Lilly is leading that effort as Secretary of HHS. But the terrorists want to take over the country, and so they attack the efforts that are being given to inoculate the people. I could go on and on and on about that. One last thing. I joined former Secretary Gates in saying what unfortunately is not being talked very much about now. Debt and deficit could have an enormous impact on the future of this country, and we continue to ignore or not find a solution to that ever-growing debt and ever-growing deficit spending. It's amazing. I spoke here a few years ago about that, and I won't go through all of that, but it is stunning to know that it took nearly 200 years for us to reach the 1 trillion debt level. In 1980, when I first started in the House of Representatives, the first tough vote was raising the debt limit cap we put on this to over 1 trillion. Ronald Reagan had just been elected president. He pleaded with Republicans who said, we're not there to spend money, taxpayer money, we're here to stop spending so much money. He said, look, we got to pay the bills, but we're going to work on spending, and we need your votes. And so I gave my vote to the president. We made some good progress there, particularly with Social Security. But from that point forward, we've gone from that 1 trillion in my service time to now $22 trillion. And the projections for the end of the next term of the president, is projected right now based on some assumptions that probably will not hold at about $28+ trillion. You undermine our ability to lead the world in financial security can have enormous consequences. Well, I would like to conclude and get to the questions. Let me just say this. As I spoke to our intelligence community on my way out of office, I told them how grateful I was that they were, as serving the American people as members of the IC, and how they have committed their careers and life to their mission. I early on, if you walk into the lobby of the CIA, it's not easy to walk into the lobby of the CIA, but if you have the chance to walk and you look at the wall, as that building was built out in Langley, it was inscribed with a verse from the Gospel of John, which said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I took that phrase and turned it into the job of the intelligence community that I lead needs to seek the truth and speak the truth. And I've worked hard to do that, and I was grateful for the support that I had from the intelligence community for being able to do that. I was so grateful for their I was also grateful for the fact that I had asked all of our members to renew their oath of office every year. It was voluntary, but they did that. And that ends with, "I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God." And given the challenge of the role of the D&I that I've been through, and especially at a time when our world is unsettled and so dangerous, I would modify that phrase to say, "Help me, God," and help our country. Our country, as I said, is going through a divided and unsettled phase. I believe it's a challenge for each of us to do our best to preserve the enduring values on which our nation was founded. Most of what I looked at, it comes to a negative conclusion. I don't mean to be a doomsayer here, because I have faith. I have faith in our founding fathers. I have faith in our Constitution. I have faith in the genius of our founding fathers in putting balance of power in 3 agencies of government. I've had the privilege of serving in the House of Representatives during the 8 years of President Ronald Reagan's leadership. Late in his presidency, during a memorial service for those who had fallen in service to our country, here's what he said. "Yes, they were ordinary men who did extraordinary things. Yes, they were heroes. And because they were heroes, let us not forget this: that for all the lovely spring and summer days, we will never share with them again. For every Thanksgiving and Christmas that will seem empty without them. There will be other moments when we see the light of discovery in young eyes that see for the first time the world around them and know the sweep of history and wonder. Why is there such a place as America? And how is it that this such a precious gift is mine? I'm the son of an immigrant who had extraordinary things happen in his life that opened doors with opportunities and the love for my country and for the realization that has been reinforced by my travels around the world. There is no place like America. There's never been any place like America. And isn't our job, each of us, regardless of what profession we're in, regardless of what we've achieved in life, don't we all really want to join those who have sacrificed and say, I want to pass this on. I want my children, my grandchildren, future generations to discover the sweep of history and to be able to say, how is it that such a precious gift is ours? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Allison.
That was fabulous. Well, I know what you're not sleeping about at night. Now none of us are going to sleep either. Okay? Now we all are going to sleep and think about the same things you are. What can we do? Your words were incredibly inspiring. What can we do as a state that works, right? And a state who has incredibly passionate Hoosiers and who want to make a difference and want all the things that you described at the end? What can each of us do as an individual to help?
Everybody will have the opportunity to engage in many, many, many things. And the great thing about being on Indiana soil is I'm so proud of my state. I was always so proud to represent my state because I think the values that our state uses, the way we balance our budget, the way we work together to meet those values that I think make us strong and obviously make us competitive economically in providing jobs for people. But there is a Midwest ethic, I think, here that I think is important, and we all have the chance to basically, whatever it is. Just out in the reception area, a group of college kids came up from IU, hey, I want to get engaged in foreign policy and intelligence, how do I do this, and so forth. Big Brothers Big Sisters came up. I used to be part of that program, and they're doing things. I was at Sagamore Institute this morning doing some wonderful policy issues and things, dealing with poverty, dealing with social crises and a whole number of other things in very effective ways. And the leadership that we've had in our state, your brother, our current governor, solid leadership. And so it's easy to brag about Indiana, and everyone plays a role in that. Look, we are at a difficult time in our country. But we do have to have faith in the fact that we're going to work through this. Yeah. And the American people call it our rally to the cause. And so I think we can be a lead in that role.
Okay, great. Thank you for sending up the cards. I'm going to start looking through them real quick. I think everybody knows, because of Dan's background, there's some things he's going to be able to answer or not answer. So appreciate the cards that come up that we feel that he can probably answer. So there's going to be some of these I might have to ask him. And in the meantime, while I'm looking at these, one quick question I wanted to ask you. I know you have I'm going to do one sports question. Sorry, but that's my background. Everybody knows that. You talked a lot about the intelligence community and how how it was critical for your role in the different groups you're working with to pull everybody together in a real teamwork environment. I know you're a huge Cubs fan. Matter of fact, I think you spent your 50th wedding anniversary throwing out a pitch at the Cubs game. So, okay.
Thanks to my wife.
Okay, so make that analogy that, teamwork in sports and how, I know you were a college athlete yourself in soccer, trying to get those 17 agencies to work together in a real teamwork environment. Talk a little bit about that while I pull out some of these questions.
Well, I use the analogy of think about the Colts or think about any football team. What you look at the sideline, and you see the coach, right? And he's pacing up and down, on the phone here, and so forth and so on.
Okay, but I have to interrupt you. The card says, after leading international security, can you please fix the Cubs? That's the card. So he's going to answer that one too. Okay.
For the second year in a row, they've collapsed in September. I'm a lifelong fan, and one of the highlights of my life was 2016 when they won the World Series. That's the first picture you will see when you walk in my office anywhere. Anyway, it's a lifelong love affair. But I use the football analogies, basically saying, you see him talking to all these other guys. Who are all these other guys? All right, this one is the quarterback coach, and this one's the line coach, and this one's the defensive tackle coach, and this one's the safety coach, and this one does this, and here's the kicker, and so forth and so on. I said, that's what we need to be as an IC. Each of us has a role. I've been nominated as the coach, and what I'd like to do is be able to turn to you guys and gals. In fact, we have several women, a current CIA director. So speaking of that, the current CIA director hired as her deputy Vaughn Bishop, and Vaughn came in and I said, I'm from Indiana. I said, oh, where? He said, never heard of it, never heard of the town. I said, try me. He said, Markle. I said, Markle? I said, I was parade marshal in Markle in all 2 blocks of your town. I walked through all 2 blocks as parade marshal in Marshall. And so I've got a Hoosier, and then working with Gina Haspel at the CIA is a relationship I knew I had to have because of the nature of their work and the amount of work that they do. And we were like bands of brothers and sisters with that. I'm diverting from that. But anyway, feeling like, okay, we're all part of the team. I said, look, we win together, we lose together. We don't point fingers. Oh, if that agency had done this, we would have known that. Or I'm not sharing that with them because I don't trust that other guy. And so I stressed that with the community. And I think we had some really good success by feeling like we're all in.
Yep. There's a couple themes in the questions that are coming in, and I'm not sure that these three are all basically the same question about the current issues going on in Washington. So you can give it back to me, or you can try to answer it.
There's much I can't say. You know, we're in the secrets business, right?
Yes, right.
And everything that's said and done in the White House is classified, and particularly in the Oval Office or in the Situation Room. I just simply can't comment on things like that. But obviously there are a number of things going on relative to that, and you've been reading about it in the paper, and there's speculation. I was looking at the legal requirements yesterday.
To make sure we stay legal today?
And it said, legal experts are divided. That's what lawyers do, right? We don't want to be on the same page. We can drag this out and make a lot of money if we. I'm a lawyer. I mean, I'm sorry. I never. For the lawyers in the audience, I do. But in any event, that is an ongoing issue, and unfortunately, I left on August 15th. That information was provided to the DNI, which is required to be provided by the Inspector General after a 3-day review. He started his 3-day review on August 12th. I did not know this, so nothing came to me. I left on August 15th. I had worked with the person that I had earlier hired to head up the National Counterterrorism Organization that's part of ODNI, Joe McGuire, a retired military. And the very next day, that was presented to Joe. I feel so bad for Joe.
Had a good retirement
He is
day,
caught in
yeah.
the squeeze here, and the lawyers are divided, so they're trying to work all that out. That's about all I can say about it.
Okay, there was a number of cards on that topic. There's a number of cards also, questions related to sort of the civility in Washington, and that you were gone.
Civility and where?
And is there a way to...
Civility is not a word that defines Washington right now.
Okay, so the cards are asking for suggestions in how to have the return of civility. That's probably a better way to say it.
Well, it all comes down to elections, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people send to Washington the people they think are the ones that are going to fulfill what they would like them to do. And when the public basically says, enough of this war going on here, both within parties and against parties, we want you to go and do what's best for the country, not what's best for re-election. Once that happens, we can return to some sense of accomplishment, at least, and hopefully civility. The second Senate that I went to was much different than the first Senate. The first Senate was working together, nobody getting everything they wanted, but coming to a conclusion that balanced off and moved us forward. The second Senate couldn't come to any conclusion because it was all or nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think that until that changes, it's going to continue. Okay.
Here's a great one. How did your terms as Indiana Senator prepare you to serve as the Director of National Intelligence under the Trump administration?
Well, by being sent to Washington, I had the opportunity to serve not only on the Armed Services Committee, but on the Intelligence Committee. And it gave me preparation in terms of issues that were directed to foreign affairs, directed to military affairs, and directed to intelligence affairs. So bringing that background, I was the first director to have that type of background. The previous four came through careers of intelligence service, some from the military intelligence and some from civilian intelligence. So from an intelligence standpoint, obviously they had much more experience in dealing with intelligence issues. But I had the benefit, and we have so much interaction with Congress and so much interaction with foreign policy, and having been a diplomat and also a member of Congress was very helpful in terms of building those relationships.
Okay, here's a direct one. Is the wall necessary?
Is the wall
The wall.
necessary? I will leave. I've traveled in Congress. When I was in the Senate, I was head of a committee that oversaw Customs and Border Protection. I flew down to San Diego, went all the way down to the border where a fence goes out into the Pacific Ocean and goes all along the southern coast of California and into Arizona and then into Texas. And I spent 3 days there talking to everybody, seeing everything and so forth and so on. One conclusion that I came to was build a 20-foot wall, they'll build a 21-foot ladder. I was told at the time they had discovered 1,000 tunnels. So build a wall, build a tunnel. I went down in one of those tunnels. Very sophisticated. It had air control. It had rail tracks, which automated cars, you dump something in it, can carry through. You could walk people who tried to immigrants through that. It started with a factory on Mexico, a mile from the wall, dig down here, to a factory in America, about a mile from the wall. It cost $2 million to build. It was estimated $2 million to build. They told me that one trip of drugs through that tunnel paid for the $2 million.
Wow.
Does a wall give us better protection in terms of how people want to walk into America, put their foot on the soil and say, you got to keep me, even though it's illegal? In places, yes. In other places, no. You have to look at electronics, we have to look at different things, and you have to look at policy issues and so forth. So I say all that from a Senate standpoint, not an intelligence standpoint, because we don't, that's not what the intelligence agency engages in.
Okay, great. One last question we have time for. This says, we are here as inaugural class of scholars in the Hamilton Luger School at Indiana University. What kinds of training and experiences should we seek out in the next 4 years to better prepare ourselves for careers in diplomacy and national security?
I talked about the sweep of history. Look at the start of America. Look at the sacrifices that have been made. Look at the leadership that has been provided. Look at what America's role has been in being a city on a hill, providing the democratic process, providing the liberty all of us enjoy that so many nations don't enjoy. Steep yourself in what has brought us to this particular place and time. Learn as much as you can about it, and then commit if that's what you want to do. I want to be part of that effort. Like I say, everybody in this room can be part of that effort, but for young kids coming through school, you won't make as much money as you might make if you are in the private sector as opposed to the public sector. You could have better living conditions and control of your schedule, but there is a reward in public service. There is a reward in service to people who need service. So whether it's big brothers, big sisters, or whether it's some element of state government or local government or federal government, there is a reward there that you are joining those who have committed themselves to carry on this precious gift of America.
Yeah. I want to thank Dan for coming today. This was a good week to be in Indiana versus Washington, so we're thankful that you joined us today. We appreciate it.
Somewhere in this audience, by surprise, my daughter drove up from Kentucky.
Aww.
She said, "Don't introduce me."
Okay.
But Laura, thank you for coming up. I love you, girl.
Oh, thank you for coming up. Yes, thank you. Okay, we appreciate the time that we had together today. Thank you again for traveling to Indiana. Today's presentation is available on economicclubofindiana.com. And then next month, early in the month in October 2nd, we have Ursula Renhold, Head of Comparative Education Research at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. It's going to be a fascinating discussion, so please make sure you come back for that. We would love to see you. And if you have any other questions, send them through on the Economic Club website. Thank you so much for coming. Dan, pleasure. Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you all.